What's up guys, welcome back to another Lorcana video. This is your boy Skinner, and boy has it been an eventful weekend. So as you may or may not know, Saturday I got to participate in a 1K here in Miami, hosted by my local store Pro Play Games, which is actually a really big name in the card community when it comes to tournaments, and was super excited to get my feet wet in my first real competitive tournament for the Lorcana game. I'll be honest, I wasn't originally going to be playing green-blue at the tournament, and you're probably very surprised to see that I ended up on that, but there's actually some reasoning behind it. So the day before the tournament, I was on Pixelborn trying to decide what deck am I going to play at this tournament, and I was just going crazy, going back and forth on different lists, trying to decide what's the best deck. And after chatting with a good friend of mine, he told me, you know what, don't play the best deck. Play the deck that you think you're the most comfortable playing. So obviously, you know, I come from an evasive background. I love playing evasives, and it's mostly honestly because of the green package. I think green is my favorite color in Lorcana right now. I'm a huge fan of Flynn Rider and Cusco for obvious reasons. So I decided, okay, I'm going to play Emerald, but what do I play as the second ink? So I put together a bunch of different brews on Pixelborn, and one of them was a green-blue list. However, my list was originally playing cards like Hades and John Silver and Mickey Mouse Detective, which there is a reason why we're not playing that in the deck, and we will talk about it. And although my deck list did do pretty well, I wasn't totally sold on the idea. So I hopped on Discord for inspiration and started scrolling through the Lorcana HQ Discord, and that's where I came across this list. So shout out to Bjornfod. This is a huge reason why I ended up playing blue-green. If you had told me before that I could play blue without playing Hades, I would have told you you're absolutely out of your mind. However, Bjornfod had a really cool idea called the Turquoise High 5, and the concept of this deck is that we don't go past turn 5. We get to 5 ink, and then we just play all of our strong 5 drops, let it go, all that stuff to close out the game. I thought this was an incredibly interesting concept, so I went ahead and took this list, made some minor adjustments by cutting Peter Pans, adding some more Tinkerbells, and then I played it for about 4 hours in Pixelborn. I really loved the build, and I loved that it didn't just fold to steel decks. Having that higher willpower on your character's late game really made a huge difference, and also having access to an inkable Dragonfire is a huge reason to play this deck. So at that point I reached out to Bjornfod in Discord and I asked him, hey, would you recommend any kind of last minute changes if you had to play a tournament tomorrow? Because I do. We chatted for a bit on what the local metagame looked like, and we came up with this list. So let's go ahead and get into the list itself. So starting us off in the 1-drops, we have 4 copies of Duke, 4 copies of Flounder, and then 2 copies of Develop Your Brain. The 2 copies of Develop Your Brain may seem a little random here, but it's really just a way to fill us out to 10 1-drops. Unfortunately, there are no other 1-drop bodies for blue and green right now, and the other option is Scepter of Arendelle, which does not have a lot of synergy. I would much prefer to draw a card. Develop Your Brain is great in situations on turn 1 where you don't see your Flounder or Duke. You're able to play it on turn 1 and set up your turn 2 so that you don't miss any more momentum. It's also not terrible late game if you draw it. You can go ahead and cycle it and draw into a card that you can play as a threat. However, on turns 2 through 5, I'm really not playing this card too much because I'm trying to curve out every turn. So for that reason, I think the card is just fine at 2 copies. So for 2-drops, we have 4 copies of Flynn Rider, 4 copies of Aurora, and 2 copies of Philatides. So we already know why we're playing 4 copies of Flynn Rider. He's got 2 lore, makes your opponent discard a card. Just an amazing green card in general, and one of the main reasons to be playing green. We also have Aurora, who also quests for 2. It's one of the few characters in the game on turn 2 that can quest for 2, so we're really happy to see that. Besides questing for 2, we also play 5-drop Aurora in the deck, which is able to shift. And then we have 2 copies of Phil. So Phil is sort of a flex spot here in the 2-drops. I personally really like him because he's able to deal with cards like Simba, which can be an issue. It even came up in a game where I was able to use Phil to provide Cheshire Cat with 3 attack for the turn. So Phil, not to be slept on, but usually just there to deal with early aggression like Simba. So getting into the 3-drops, we have 4 copies of Cheshire Cat, 3 copies of Jasper, and 3 copies of Jasmine. Cheshire Cat, obviously really good for green decks, very consistent, 0-3 stat line, which isn't great, but it does quest for 2, and whenever your opponent attacks into it, if they kill it, it does trade back, so very strong sometimes against cards like Maui that have to deal with it. It's able to go ahead and trade with them. Jasper, wow, what more can I say about Jasper? So Jasper continues to impress me. I played him in the evasive list. I'm playing him here. He is a 2-4, and although he only quests for 1, that 4 willpower is very important, especially with all the steel decks running around. He cannot be killed by a single smash. So in the tournament last Saturday, I did play against Ezekiel, super nice guy, and he ended up being the top seed going into top 8. Whenever he had Jaspers in play, I wasn't able to do anything. Whenever I had Jaspers in play, he wasn't able to do anything. So Jasper just an absolute all-star in the matchup and continues to impress me, honestly. He is just such a good card. And then we have 3 copies of Jasmine. She is a 3-3 that quests for 2. And I guess this is a great time to talk about Mickey Mouse. So Detective Mickey, obviously a 3-drop that seems like an auto-include into every blue-green deck, and I usually would agree with you. However, there's reasoning why we don't play him in this deck. Let's say you're getting to turn 3 and you've got Mickey in your hand, but you've also got cards like Jasper or Cheshire Cat in your hand. We want to play Mickey every single time on 3 because that's where he's going to give us the most value, but by doing so, we're not allowing ourselves to make a decision whether we want to play Cheshire Cat, Jasper, we always want to be playing that Mickey. As soon as we get that Mickey out there, we definitely want to be playing 5 drops next turn, so that really leaves our 3 drops and 4 drops in kind of a weird place. We don't get to play the 3 drops on turn 3 because we're playing Mickey. We totally skip our 4 drops, which are pretty powerful to begin with, not to mention giving up a little bit of consistency by running 4 more uninkables in the deck. I will say I'm running a newer version of this list after playing the tournament, and it does play Mickeys in it, but I have yet to decide whether or not they are absolutely must-haves. I see a lot of reasons to play them, I see a lot of reasons not to play them, so overall it's something that I would recommend testing yourself and seeing whether or not you like it. I definitely think it could be incredibly strong, I'm just not totally sold on it quite yet. It was actually pretty funny, I got to the tournament and I was telling the store owner how I was playing blue-green, and his reaction was, "Oh man, you're gonna have access to Hades, that's such a good card." And I'm like, "No, I'm not playing Hades." He's like, "Oh, well, whatever, you have Detective Mickey, you can get to your 5 drops really crazy, Cusco." And I'm like, "Oh, I'm not playing Mickey." And then he looks at me and he's like, "Why the hell are you playing blue?" But I promise you this deck has been running really smooth without the Mickey Mouse. Getting to our 4 drops, we have 4 copies of Hans, 4 copies of Tinkerbell. Obviously the best 4 drops that we can play. Hans giving us 3 lore, Tinkerbell giving us evasive. Hans really good in the aggressive matchups. That 3/3 stat line allows him to attack into things like Simba and Ariel, but also just quest for 3, which is able to race a lot of these aggro decks, which is very important. And then we have Tinkerbell, which continues to be an all-star. Obviously we play her in evasives, we're also playing her here. Tinkerbell is a constant threat, especially against control decks when they want to be playing Rafiki or Zeus to run into your Tinkerbell, and they cannot do so. Having to waste a Dragonfire on Tinkerbell is just fine with us. We have much stronger cards that we want to keep around. Not to mention Tinkerbell has a cute interaction with bodyguards, so overall, lots of reason to be playing Tinkerbell. She is an all-star. And then the last 4 drop, which in my opinion is the sleeper reason to be playing blue right now, is Eye of the Fates. So Eye of the Fates, incredibly strong against control. I wasn't sure how much control I was going to be seeing at the tournament, or else I would have played more copies. In my newer list that I'm testing, I do have 3 copies of this card in the deck just because I feel like it's incredibly strong. It allows you to essentially add another threat to the board without having to worry about Be Prepared or Dragonfire. And when most of your deck is already questing for 2 or 3, being able to add an additional lore on top of that really puts the pressure on control decks, especially with the limited options in dealing with items right now. We don't have any characters in the game right now that can come into play and immediately lore, but this is essentially that. You drop it in, give it to somebody, and you can lore for an extra point, which could really throw off the math for your opponent as well. And then we have the bread and butter of the deck, the 5 drops. So we've got 4 copies of Cusco, 4 copies of Mad Hatter, 4 copies of Aurora, 4 copies of Maleficent, and 4 Let It Go. The cool thing about this deck is once you get to 5 ink, you can play everything in the deck. You don't need to ink anymore. You can cast all the powerful cards in your deck. Cusco, obviously most powerful green card that we could be playing right now. He is uninkable, but he is the only uninkable in the deck, which is very, very good. Keeps the deck very consistent. 4 copies of Mad Hatter, so obviously elephant in the room is we don't have a lot of draw power. Mad Hatter does occasionally get you some cards, but the coolest thing about this deck is because you stop inking at 5, you're committing less resources to the inkwell, therefore you do have a little more cards in your hand to be able to make choices. 4 copies of Big Aurora, obviously very powerful at being able to shift in on turn 3. We could use this to sometimes kill Simba, sometimes we can use it to cast Let It Go, which is really crazy on turn 3. One of the biggest strengths of playing green is all the unfavorable trades your opponent has to make in order to deal with your characters. And Aurora just adds another level to that by giving them all ward, making them all into little mini Cuscos. So now they cannot efficiently deal with your characters. They have to deal with Aurora first. It even came up in one of my games where my opponent was not able to use Jasper to target my Mad Hatter. And if you do manage to get 2 Auroras in play against decks like Steel, very, very powerful combination. So Aurora, really, really good against the Steel matchup, and really, really good in general. Also great against the Steel matchup, and one of the main reasons we're playing blue, we have this huge Maleficent 3/6. She quests for 3, and that 6 willpower is very, very strong. With the exception of Maui, she usually requires multiple attacks to be killed, and even survives attacks from cards like Cerberus, which are being played in the more mid-rangey Amber Steel decks now. All of our 5 drops in this deck are incredibly efficient, incredibly powerful, and the point of this deck is just to quest as fast as you can, and if your opponent plays anything that would disrupt that, we're going to play Let It Go and just keep on questing. Having access to essentially an inkable Dragonfire that you can sing as well, super, super powerful, and one of the main reasons I ended up playing blue in the tournament. So I did end up going X and 1 in the tournament. My only loss was in round 5 to Red Purple Control. It was a very close set. It went down to game 3 and I was able to get to 19 lore, but unfortunately Double Elsa did seal the deal, so shout out to Albert. And then once I got to round 6, my opponent and I decided to draw because we had very good tiebreakers and we were X and 1. Now I've read a lot of stuff online, people upset that we didn't actually play top 8 out. The event did start at 3 p.m, so by the time we got to top 8, it was almost 11 p.m. I don't live that far from the event, but a lot of people did drive further than I did, and we were all so tired after 6 rounds of playing that we unanimously decided we were just going to split the prize and I'll go home and have a good night. So we'll never know exactly how good this deck would have done in top 8, but honestly the way that I was performing that day, I really did like my chances, and had the tournament finished earlier, I probably would have opted to play, but I was also very tired and happy to go home and get some rest. I just want to give a huge thank you to everybody who was cheering me on Twitter. You guys made me feel like you were there with me, standing there behind me, cheering me on, so that was really awesome. I thought I was originally known for being the evasive guy, but it looks like I ended up being the budget guy, so I'm happy that this deck fits the budget, and I'm happy that it's consistent, so I really hope you guys enjoy it, and thank you guys so much again for all the new follows, all the new subscriptions. You guys put a huge smile on my face this weekend, and honestly, it's one that I'll remember for a very long time. If you guys have any further questions and comments about the deck, I'd be happy to answer them in the comments below. As I mentioned, I am working on a newer version of this list, which I'm not ready to share quite yet just because it is a prototype. But in the meantime, I think you are more than able to play this version of the list. It's very consistent. The only thing I would probably recommend is if you were playing against more control decks, I'd maybe trim one Hans for an additional Eye of Fates. But other than that, I think the deck is very consistent, and if you pilot it well, I don't think you have any truly bad matchups. Thank you guys so much again for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video, and until then, peace!